So there are many situations in tree work where you would like to be able to set up a piece of rigging hardware in a tree, get your work done, and then just be able to come down and not have to go, all the way back up to the top of the tree to remove the piece of rigging hardware. So I made a video about a year and a half ago, I think it was, about a custom retrievable rigging point, a piece of, like a Sling piece of hardware that I was working on. And that video got a lot of good comments. So I wanted to just come back and take another look at different options available to us for retrievable rigging in tree work. But before we get into that, just quickly look at traditional rigging, such as blocks and rings. These are pieces of hardware that go on slings. You install them in the top of a tree, and then at the end of the job, you have to remove them from the top of the tree. So the difference with retrievable rigging is you can retrieve it, you can uninstall it from the ground. And in addition to that, for a lot of these options, you can actually install them from the ground as well. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of pieces of gear here we're just going to take a look at. So my go-to for regular rigging is just X-rings on an ultra sling. That's my favorite. But a lot of people love blocks, especially if you're using, a GRCS or something for lifting. So, so with a lot of these retrievable rigging options, they're not going to allow you to be able to do everything that a block can do, for instance, in terms of lifting, as an example. These are more just for lowering. Anyway, I'm going to try and work my way from simplest systems in the direction of more complicated, okay? So the first option for retrievable rigging is just going to be classic natural crotch rigging, right? This is the original. There's nothing, if you don't install any hardware, then there's no hardware to retrieve. Natural crotch rigging is the classic. It's what I learned on, and I still use it constantly. There is an art to it. You're managing friction. There's an art to that, the selection of crotches that you're going to use, the size of them, the orientation, which way they face relative to each other. There's a lot going on with natural crotch rigging. It's not, a lot of people think it's really simplistic, but it's not. One of the main things to consider with natural crotch rigging is the selection of rope. You don't want to use just any old rope if you're going to be natural crotch rigging. My favorite option is a 12-strand. This is called Yale Buzz. It's a bright orange rope. I love this rope. It doesn't have a core, it's non-rotational, and it does really well in natural crotch rigging. The other classic for natural crotch rigging is just 3-strand rope. This holds up really well with natural crotch rigging. And then the other one that I love as well is just an old climbing rope. Obviously, we're not talking crazy heavy rigging, light and medium rigging, but you can get a lot of work done with an old, by old, I don't mean used up, I mean it's retired. I'm not going to use it for climbing anymore, but there's still lots of life in it, and I can definitely use it for natural crotch rigging. Okay, so that would be option number one. It's the simplest form of retrievable rigging. Option number two is a different take on natural crotch rigging, and that is these pieces of conduit. They're called the Dan House rope sleeve. This one's really old. You can see most of the tape is worn off. This is what they look like when they're brand new. It's a piece of conduit taped up with these nice end caps on there. But basically, this is the closest thing that you can get to natural crotch rigging, but it's a piece of hardware, right? So you just thread the rope through the conduit, and then instead of the rope running directly on the natural crotch, it's running in the conduit on the natural crotch, right? And then to retrieve it, all you do is you tie a stopper knot in the line, and then it just pulls down. It's super simple, and I really, really love these Danhouse rope sleeves for natural crotch rigging. Again, this is not crazy heavy rigging. You can definitely smash these and destroy them if you go too heavy. But for kind of normal size stuff that we do day in and day out, these are amazing. So that's the Danhouse rope sleeve. The next one on my list here, hang on. The next one on my list would be what I call, let me see this here. I would call a floating rigging point, okay? So this is where you have a line with a block on it. So you take the line, you run the line through the tree, right? And then you have your actual rigging rope through that block. Okay, so the line that has the block on it, it has to be locked off at the bottom. You can lock it off either on a bollard, like a porter wrap, or you can tie it off to the base, similar to what we would do with a basal anchor in climbing. So you would use it just like this. Like this is your rigging line, and this rope is holding the block. And then when you're done, you can just lower it like this, right? The main thing to consider with this setup is you're multiplying the forces. So if I'm holding a load on the one side of this rope, then that same load is also on the other side, of course, so you're doubling it. So my load is doubled at the block, which means similarly on this support line, the load, taking into account that there's friction up top, the load here is also doubled. So in the worst case scenario, if you had a really low friction crotch that the support line was running through, you could up to 4x the load. The load in the rigging would be up to 4x on the actual anchor point for this system. So the floating anchor point is it's a really great option in the right scenario. It's really simplistic, super easy to set up from the ground, set up and retrieve from the ground, but you need to consider the force multiplication, right? So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Hopefully I'm explaining that right. The floating anchor point. The next one would be the good old friction saver. So if you've been climbing for a while, I would say chances are pretty good that you have an old friction saver kicking around. Maybe you got it right when you started, maybe you don't use it very much or at all anymore. What you can do is just retire it from climbing, and you can start using it as a rigging point, right? So hopefully anyone familiar with these in climbing, they work the exact same way in rigging, obviously. You can set them from the ground, you can retrieve them from the ground. You can retrieve it using throw line so it doesn't just come smashing down. This is an old school version. This is an old Buckingham from over 15 years ago. Most of the newer styles, they look like this, and they are adjustable, right? So these are even nicer, these newer ones, because they're fully adjustable. You have more options for where you can use them, okay? So again, not crazy heavy rigging. This is light to medium duty, but these are amazing for rigging. I use them, have used them many times in the past. Again, I need to stress, you can't you never want to mix climbing and rigging gear, right? So once you start using a piece of what was climbing gear, once you start using that in rigging, you can't go back. You don't want to go back, use it in climbing ever again. So just be careful that you're marking this stuff. So if it's used for rigging, it's not going to be used for climbing anymore. The next thing is another take on a friction saver, but this is made specifically for rigging, and this is the double X-ring sling. Okay, so this is made with 2 different size rings, exactly the same as a friction saver, but the hardware is more suitable for rigging, and it's better for heavier stuff. Now the way that all of these friction saver type slings work is, in order to retrieve them, you need some type of piece of hardware. The one thing that I've used for a really long time, if I can get it off of here, is just a cheap quick link. This one here is not rated. It's just from the hardware store. It's like $4 or something on a little piece of throw line. This is what I use. I've used this for years. This is well over 10 years old, this old quick link, and I use it for all kinds of retrieval. But there's lots of options there. You know, you can buy these specialized retrieval cones, retrieval balls. You can use, this is an accessory, a locking accessory beaner. Don't use a regular one. If you're going to use one of these, it's got to be locking. But just keep in mind, here's another option. This is a ring off of an old throw ball that was busted. So I took the ring off, and this works really nice for retrieving as well. The concept is, with all of these retrieval tools, the concept is that it's gonna pass through, like it's sized in such a way that it can pass through the one ring, and it'll get stuck on the other ring. Actually, for this one, I made a custom. This is a monkey's fist tied in paracord, and there's a marble inside. I had to make a custom one for this particular setup because this is a pretty tight eye here. So the monkey fist fits through here, and it gets stuck in the small ring. And that's how these systems retrieve. Okay. Now this one gave me grief quite a few times, and this is what actually led to the custom-made sling that I was talking about earlier. The way this is set up is, to retrieve it, it gets caught in the small ring, which means that this large ring, this is a 28 by 20 X ring, has to pass through the crotch. And you can see, if it tries to pass through in this direction, there's a good chance it can go through. But what happens is, a lot of times it'll turn sideways, okay? And when it's turned sideways, there's a decent chance that it just gets stuck. You can't really see that on the screen, but there's a decent chance on a crotch it just jams because it's sideways. You know, if you could make it go this way, it would be more likely to fit through. So that is what drove me to make this custom rigging sling, which is the next thing on my list here, which is right here, okay? So again, this is also based on just the basic friction saver concept. You have a large ring and a small ring. The difference here is the 28 by 20 is functioning as the small ring. This is a steel ring. This is functioning as the large ring. So this ring is the one that would, on this sling, is what would pass through, what would have to pass through the crotch. And this ring, being smaller and skinnier, is less likely to get jammed in the crotch than this size ring, okay? I hope that makes sense. Now, I knew that I wanted a custom spliced prusik on a ring. And I'm not good with splicing double braids or anything. I never really got into that. So I contacted David Ricks through Instagram. He's in North Carolina. And he spliced me this for this custom sling, but he also sent me a bunch of other stuff. So this is my current version of the retrievable custom-made sling. Now I'll show you a couple things that David also sent me. Okay, so this is a double braid sling with an X ring on the one side and a large steel ring on the other side. So again, this is another take on the friction saver concept, but this one is much heavier duty for rigging. This can handle a much more significant load. So again, this is set up so that the X ring is the smaller of the two. So this large ring would have to pass through. Now, this is quite a large ring. I don't know, I can't remember the diameter on this, but you'd have to think before trying to pass this through a crotch remotely. But this is a really nice sling that I like. It's an excellent option. And David was telling me that they hang entire trees, cut from the ground, hang them off the GRCS using a sling like this. So this is a really nice option. And then the last option is another one that David made for me. This is another double braid sling with the large steel ring on the one side, and then he custom spliced a Pinto rig pulley on a prusik cord. Okay, and the way that this one works, this gives you even more options than the last one. So you can use this similar to the other one, right? As a double ring friction saver style rigging point, but you also have the option of setting it up in what would be called like a Pulleysaver type setup. You can, which allows you to choke it on a stem. So you can pass it around. The Pinto can fit through the large ring. Whoops. Through the large ring like this, and you tighten that up. And then what you do on the terminal end of the sling, there's an eye, and you would take, again, something like a locking accessory beener, fits through the eye, and then, whoops, and then you just, anyone familiar with a Pulleysaver setup from climbing, this is going to be set up exactly the same. So your rope passes through the pulley, right? But then you take the accessory beener and you put that on the tail, right? And that way, come on now. Okay, so you put that on the tail. So that way, when you put your retrieval ball or whatever on here, you pull this out, okay, and it gets caught further down on the accessory beener, and then it yanks the rigging point out like that, and then this comes down to the ground. Now, if I was going to use it like that, I wouldn't set it up without some sort of retrieval line, because I wouldn't want a nice piece of hardware like this smashing to the ground when I'm done. So I would use something like this. This is 6 mil cordage. I've used this for years. Whenever I'm in a lift, like a bucket truck or a spider lift or whatever, I'll go up with 75 feet worth of 6 mil cordage as a retrieval line. If I got stuck in the lift and I had to haul up anything, I always have this emergency line. But I can also use it for other things, and this is one of them. So if I was going to use this and retrieve it from the ground one way I could do this, I could take this retrieval line, I could put it higher in the tree, right? And then I could just tie it to, this sling, and then when this comes out, it would be tied to this retrieval line, and I could lower it, right? Hopefully that makes sense, and that would keep it from smashing down. Okay, so that's a whole bunch of options. I'm sure there are others that I'm just not thinking of, but hopefully I've covered enough that'll give you some ideas, get you thinking about different retrievable rigging options. Big thanks to David Ricks for all this custom splicing. He makes amazing gear, and I actually, like I say, I didn't ask him for a couple of these slings. He just sent them to me as well. So big shout out to him. Hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully you can get some value out of it. And yeah, just get thinking about retrievable rigging. In the right situation, you can really save yourself a lot of time. Again, setting something up and not having to go back up to get it when you're done can be a huge time saver, okay? So until next time.